Augustus Savage was the only African American commissioned to create an exhibit for the 1939 World's Fair in Flushing, New York.
I have taken for my theme the National Negro Anthem. It is a poem written by the late James Weldon Johnson and set to the music by his brother, Rosamond Johnson. The title is Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing.
Savage worked for over a year creating a 16-foot sculpture that paid homage to African American culture and the promise of Black youth. What were the reactions to the sculpture?
It was the most popular piece of art in the 1939 World's Fair. She was able to make souvenirs to sell.
After this highly publicized display at the World's Fair, it is literally just dismantled and discarded. That's emblematic of the erasure of a history of African American artists, African American culture. We were there, she was there, but all that we're left with today is a small-scale cast of the original work of art.
Not only was Lift Every Voice and Sing destroyed, but some say 70 of the approximately 160 works of art by Augusta Savage are lost or missing today. I'm Jeffreen Hayes. I am the curator of the Augusta Savage Renaissance Woman exhibition, and I'm on a search to understand why one of America's greatest sculptors seems to have been erased. I'm in Harlem, y'all. The first stop on my search for answers is the Schomburg Center, the research mecca of Black culture.
I manage a collection of over 15,000 items that document the Black diaspora. And of course, we have the largest collection of Augusta Savage work in a public institution. We have about 22 pieces. Here we have the reclining nude. This one is bronze. And this is the pugilist. She was able to really capture the strength. You can see his musculature and his facial features. And then we have Laughing Boy. She did a lot of kids.
And what's the material?
It's plaster. This, of course, is her bust of James Weldon Johnson, a real Renaissance man, a lawyer, songwriter, poet, Secretary General in NAACP, and a good friend of hers. And this is the original gammon. That one set her off. That one set her off.
We only have 2 boxes of her papers. She didn't leave much behind for us.
I was born on the 29th of February at the dark of the moon. I was a leap year baby, and it seems to me that I've been leaping ever since.
Born in 1892 in Green Cove Springs, Florida, the 7th of 14 children, Savage resisted her parents' early disapproval of her art making.
Ever since I was a tiny little tot, I wanted to model things out of any material I could get my hands on. Dough, soap, mud, or clay. I made ducks by the dozen from the red clay and would stick them all around the yard.
Augusta got recognition at the county fair in Florida, and the commissioner of the fair said, Augusta, you should go to New York so that you could explore your talent, so you could be an artist. So she took him up on it, and she got accepted to Cooper Union.
I had just arrived in New York with exactly $4.50, a determination to become an artist, and a successful one, in 6 months.
She was a single mom. She left her daughter Irene with the family so she could pursue her education here, and finished her degree in 3 years instead of 4. She did work as a laundress, and things were very hard for her. She wasn't making a lot of money.
After getting established, Savage, who was widowed twice and once divorced, brought her daughter and 7 other family members up from Florida to live in her small apartment in Harlem. Her home also became a gathering place for leading artists and intellectuals of the 1920s and 30s New Negro movement, later known as the Harlem Renaissance.
Zora Neale Hurston was there, Richard Wright was there, Countee Cullen was one of her best friends.
The Harlem Renaissance was central to the portrayal of every aspect of modern Black life that was taking shape in the new Black cities that were the result of the Great Migration. We had the founding of the NAACP, of the Urban League, as well as literature, music. This was the period when jazz really began to flourish.
In 1923, Savage got a scholarship to attend a prestigious art school in France.
Then suddenly, when I was all prepared and about ready to sail, I got a letter from the committee saying they were awfully sorry I did not let them know I was colored, as they had not made arrangements for colored students. Can you imagine the headache and heartache resulting? However, it only served to fire me with more determination than ever to succeed.
She started a letter writing campaign to let everyone know what had happened to her.
I hear so many complaints to the effect that Negroes do not take advantage of the educational opportunities offered them. Well, one of the reasons is that as soon as one of us gets his head above the crowd, there are millions of feet ready to crush it back again. How am I to compete with other American artists if I'm not to be given the same opportunity?
You know, she still never gave up the dream of studying in Paris, and then she finally got it in 1929 when she did Gammon. And that took her to Europe to study. So as a Black woman, she just powered through that. She never let it stop her, it just made her stronger. She was a way maker. She was an artist advocate, an artist educator, and an activist.
I'm at the location of the Savage Studio of Arts and Crafts, a space that she founded in 1932 in this building. Here, Savage hosted free art classes that included painting and sculpture and printmaking.
We really have a lot of native talent in Harlem. I hope that I can make the school a permanent one, as there is a crying need for it. We've had to turn down 60 persons in the last 6 weeks for lack of space.
Augusta put a little bit of steel in my backbone. I don't think that I would have continued against all the odds it is to be a woman artist, to keep right on working. It was because she was my mentor, because she was my friend, and because she had done the same thing.
She started the Harlem Artists Guild. to hire Black artists onto projects.
Augusta Savage was one of the leading lights in the Harlem community. This was one of the most important periods in my life. When I came in contact with her, she thought it was time for me to start being paid for what I was doing. I don't know how they make a living delivering newspapers or working in a laundry, but when I turned 21 in 1938, Augusta literally took me downtown and had me signed up on the Federal Art Project, where I was paid a tremendous salary at that time of $23.86 a week.
Savage also secured government funding during the Great Depression to expand her school to provide training to 2,500 youth and adults. I'm at the location where the Harlem Community Art Center was established in 1937 by Augusta Savage. There were a number of African-American art masters who not only taught, but were also students at the center. The way that she was navigating her career, I began to really think about her as a race woman, putting the Black body and the Black experience at the center, creating a deeper understanding of race in daily life.
Augusta Savage was very much in tune with everyday people, and she made works of everyday people.
Which work speaks to you the most?
Well, I have to say Gammon. That was my first encounter with her work. A sweet little boy with his cap on. He was contemporary and definitely Black. For me, I could tell when an artist loves me by what they create. When they're speaking to me, and they recognize Blackness in a beautiful way. And, you know, for 1929, for her to leave that for us. So I love that work.
It's a very academically classical rendering of a young boy's face. And compare that to the way young Black boys were depicted in the popular culture. That portrait was absolutely modern. It was radically modern.
Although it's no longer here, this is where Augusta Savage opened the first Black art gallery in the country, the Salon of Contemporary Negro Arts.
I've long felt that Negro artists have reached the point where they should have a gallery of their own. We have made every effort to make this one of the finest galleries in the country, a mecca for all art lovers.
The opening was a grand affair attended by over 500 art lovers. But in the midst of the Great Depression, the artwork didn't sell. The gallery closed within 3 months, and funding for the Harlem Community Art Center ran out too.
She said, the community is not ready for me. And when she told me this story, she literally cried. She was so broken.
In looking for work by Augusta Savage, I was struck by how few places had the work. We don't have her in our collection. Even historically Black colleges and universities don't all have works by Augusta Savage. the museum market, the art market, the galleries, the critical attention was given to male artists. Even today, 87% of works of art in museum collections are by men. Augusta Savage was at the forefront of the forgotten woman artist. But she didn't have the means to ship Lift Every Voice and Sing back from Flushing into a storeroom in Harlem or a museum and have it preserved. It's probably the most tragic example of Black women artists not having resources to preserve their work.
After the losses and disappointments she experienced, Savage took refuge in upstate New York, 100 miles north of Harlem, where some say she just disappeared. This is really a pilgrimage. Here we go. The Augusta Savage house and studio has been listed in the National Register of Historic Places by the United States Department of the Interior.
Hello, Dr. Hayes. It's so good to see you.
Anthony. This is so exciting.
Yeah, welcome to Augusta Savage's home.
So tell us about how Augusta ended up in Saugerties.
She had friends in the Hudson Valley, and that may have been one of the reasons that she came to Saugerties specifically. It was also a lovely town near a river.
What's your connection to Augusta?
I'm related to the owners of this house, but the earlier connection is to my grandfather, who was a scientist, and he met Augusta Savage in the late 40s. She would occasionally come over to my grandparents' home on the river and give these poetry readings. So this was her typewriter, this Remington. That's where she did her writing, her stories, her poetry.
I've spent hours in deep communion with the humming birds and bees. I've exchanged love's deepest secrets with the softly sighing trees. I've discussed my pains and pleasures. I've revealed my dearest treasures. And upon life's harsh alarms, I've turned my back.
Very few people know about her as a poet or a writer. It's wonderful to hear that perspective about Augusta.
My grandfather, he would say, she's the smartest person you'll ever meet. He would talk about composers, and he would talk about scientists, and he'd talk about Augusta Savage. It was usually something like Beethoven, Erwin Schrödinger, who came up with quantum physics, and Augusta Savage. And so she was in that orbit of great human beings, great minds. I want to show you a few other things.
Yes, please.
Yes. This is the plastiline, and it was a type of clay. This is the original one that she would have used to do her sculpting. So for instance, like this is the Marian Anderson sculpture. She made that while she was here in Saugerties. There's a general sense that she was forgotten. But from what we understand, she had people coming here all the time.
She still had a social life.
She still had a social life.
connected to New York. So tell me, what are the plans for this space?
In the next few years, we maybe have some sort of residency program for aspiring artists and writers.
So it would be helping to fulfill a dream that she put out into the world to found a colony of young artists in the countryside.
I wanted to ask you what your impressions were of coming here and seeing what you saw today.
will probably take me a while to fully digest that I'm sitting in this moment in the same kitchen as someone that I have lovingly called my art godmother. I think that there have definitely been attempts to erase her and downplay her importance.
Yeah.
I'm just really happy that she was most likely at peace here in a way that she may not have found in the city.
I have created nothing really beautiful, really lasting. But if I can inspire one of these youngsters to develop the talent I know they possess, then my monument will be in their work.